The tables had turned completely by 1945. German soldiers now dove for cover when they heard the deep, sustained roar of American firepower. The psychological impact was devastating. Veterans reported that Wehrmacht units would abandon positions rather than face the meat chopper. General Omar Bradley put it best in his memoirs. The German machine gun was fearsome in sound and impact. But when we needed sustained fire support, there was no substitute for American .50 caliber firepower. It won battles through reliable performance when soldiers needed it most. This wasn't how the war started. Back in 1942, American GIs crouched in foxholes had a different fear. They called it Hitler's buzz saw. The sound was unlike anything they'd ever heard. Not the sharp crack of rifles or steady thump of mortars. Something far more terrifying. A mechanical buzzing that seemed to tear air apart. It spit death at 100 rounds per minute. By 1942, this had become the most feared sound where American forces met German defenders. The MG-42 was revolutionary in its simplicity. German engineers at Mauser had solved a problem with their earlier MG-34. That weapon was excellent, perhaps the finest automatic weapon in the world, but it was expensive and time-consuming to manufacture. The answer came in 1941 with the MG-42. Built from stamped metal parts rather than costly machined components, it could be manufactured in a fraction of the time. More importantly, it fired faster than anything else on Earth. Where the MG-34 cycled at 900 rounds per minute, the new weapon sustained 1,200. Some variants reached 1,500. The sound was distinctive and terrifying. Individual shots blended into a continuous roar. American soldiers described it as cloth being torn, or a giant zipper pulled open at impossible speed. But across the Atlantic, American factories were building something different. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun rolled off production lines. Heavier and slower, but carrying a punch that could stop a truck dead. American troops called it Ma Deuce with affection. When engineers mounted 4 of these monsters together, they created the meat chopper, something Germans would learn to fear even more than their own buzz saw. The story really begins with a simple truth from the Great War. Firepower wins battles. Volume of fire could pin down entire companies. It could break up attacks and turn combat's tide faster than any single factor. By 1939, storm clouds gathered over Europe again. Both sides understood the next war would be won by whoever delivered the most devastating automatic fire. The psychological impact of the MG-42 was immediate and devastating. When that sound erupted from German positions, Allied troops knew they faced something beyond conventional automatic fire. The rounds came so fast that taking cover became desperate, scrambling for survival. Veterans who faced it in Tunisia, Sicily, and later Normandy all described the same paralyzing fear. When they heard that mechanical scream, terror struck deep. But the Germans had unknowingly handed enemies a crucial advantage. The MG-42's incredible rate of fire created serious logistical problems. At 1,200 rounds per minute, a single gun could exhaust ammunition in seconds of continuous fire. Gun crews had to carry enormous quantities of ammunition. Resupply became a constant challenge. More critically, the high rate of fire generated tremendous heat. Frequent barrel changes were needed to prevent overheating and jamming. Meanwhile, American industry geared up with a different philosophy. Where German engineers focused on speed and psychological impact, American designers prioritized reliability, power, and sustained fire capability. The M2 Browning embodied this approach perfectly. Designed by legendary John Moses Browning near World War I's end, it fired the massive .50 caliber BMG cartridge. nearly twice the diameter of German 7.92 mm ammunition. While the MG-42 fired faster, each M2 bullet carried devastating kinetic energy. A single 50 caliber round could penetrate light armor. It could destroy aircraft engines and inflict casualties where rifle fire was ineffective. The weapon's 550 rounds per minute seemed modest compared to the German buzzsaw, but it was steady, sustainable, and deadly accurate. What truly set the M2 apart was versatility. German forces used the MG-42 primarily as infantry support. The American 50 caliber found its way onto virtually every platform the military could devise. Sherman tanks carried them for close defense. B-17 flying fortresses bristled with them against fighter attacks. Navy PT boats mounted them for surface action. From frozen Aleutian Islands to sweltering New Guinea jungles, the M2 proved capable of operation anywhere. When American engineers began experimenting with multiple gun mounts, true potential became apparent. If one M2 was formidable, what could four accomplish working together? The answer came in 1943 with the M45 quad mount introduction, a system that earned one of the war's most feared nicknames. The meat chopper mounted four M2 Browning machine guns on a single electrically operated turret. Combined firepower was staggering. While each gun fired at 550 rounds per minute, the four-gun system delivered 2,200 rounds per minute of 50 caliber devastation. American forces suddenly possessed a weapon that exceeded the MG-42's psychological impact. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen adjusted elevation on his Quad 50 mount. The morning mist hung low over Normandy hedgerows. It was June 15, 1944, 9 days after D-Day. Americans were pushing inland against fierce German resistance. Chen had been a machine gunner since North Africa, but this was his first time behind the meat chopper. He was about to discover how dramatically the balance had shifted. The German counterattack came at dawn. Spearheaded by Wehrmacht Infantry Company, supported by two MG-42 teams positioned in the bocage. The familiar sound erupted across the battlefield. That terrifying buzz saw roar that had dominated so many earlier engagements. For a moment, advancing Americans hesitated, diving for whatever cover they could find as 200 rounds per minute tore through morning air. But this time was different. Chen depressed his firing button. The Quad 50 responded with a sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. Four heavy machine guns speaking in unison. Their deep-throated roar drowned out even the MG-42s. 2,200 rounds per minute of 50 caliber ammunition transformed the German position. The thick Norman hedgerows that provided excellent cover offered no protection against armor-piercing rounds. They punched through vegetation, stone, and earth with ease. Within 90 seconds, both German machine gun positions had fallen silent. The psychological impact on surviving Wehrmacht soldiers was immediate and profound. For 3 years, they had relied on automatic weapons superiority to offset Allied numerical advantages. Now they faced firepower that not only matched, but exceeded their own, delivered with the kind of sustained accuracy that American industrial precision made possible. The first M45 quad mounts appeared in the European theater in early 1944. Mounted on M16 half-tracks and towed M55 trailers. German pilots already struggling against increasing Allied air superiority found themselves facing a new nightmare. The Quad 50 could engage aircraft at ranges and with firepower that made low-level attacks suicidal. Luftwaffe pilots, who had grown accustomed to strafing Allied positions with relative impunity, discovered Americans could now shoot back with equal ferocity. But the real revelation came when Allied forces began using the meat chopper against ground targets. The concentrated firepower of 450 caliber machine guns could literally pulverize defensive positions. Concrete bunkers crumbled under sustained fire. Trees sheltering snipers were cut down at the trunk. Even lightly armored vehicles found themselves vulnerable to armor-piercing rounds the M2 could fire. Technical Sergeant Maria Vasquez described the difference in a letter home to Texas. "The German gun sounds scary as all get out, like some machine from hell. But they can't keep it up. We can. When we get into a firefight with those buzz saws, we just settle in. Let Ma Deuce do the talking. Pretty soon, they either run out of ammo or their barrels overheat. Then it's our turn to show them what American firepower looks like." Vasquez was describing a fundamental shift in automatic weapons combat. The MG-42, for all its fearsome reputation, was ultimately designed for shock effect. Its incredible rate of fire could devastate attacking forces through sheer psychological intimidation. But in the grinding attritional warfare that characterized the war's final year, sustainability mattered more than spectacle. The M2 Browning family excelled in exactly these conditions. Their heavy construction allowed for sustained fire that could continue for hours. The powerful 50 caliber cartridge retained effectiveness at ranges where lighter weapons became marginal. Most importantly, American logistical systems could keep these weapons supplied under conditions where German supply lines were increasingly disrupted. Technical specifications only told part of the story. The MG-42, despite its fearsome reputation, was fundamentally limited by its design philosophy. The emphasis on maximum rate of fire created a weapon spectacular in short bursts, but difficult to sustain in prolonged engagements. Barrel overheating, ammunition consumption, and strain on gun crews all conspired to limit effectiveness in extended firefights. The M2, by contrast, was designed for endurance. The contrast became stark when considering production and logistics. While German industry struggled to maintain quality and quantity under increasing Allied bombing, American factories were hitting their stride. The M2 Browning was relatively simple to manufacture. It used readily available materials and could be produced in enormous quantities. By war's end, American industry had delivered over 3 million 50 caliber machine guns to Allied forces worldwide. Perhaps most telling was the reaction of German soldiers encountering American 50 caliber fire for the first time. Prisoner interrogations revealed that many Wehrmacht veterans were shocked by the power and sustainability of Allied 50 caliber fire. Reports from the Italian campaign described German units withdrawing from positions not because they were overrun, but because they could not endure the sustained pounding of M2 fire. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Hoffmann, a Luftwaffe pilot captured after his Focke-Wulf 190 was brought down by Quad 50 fire during the Battle of the Bulge, described the experience. "We had learned to deal with light anti-aircraft fire, even American 30 caliber machine guns. You could fly through that and accept some damage. But those 4-gun 50 caliber mounts were different. You could not survive contact with them. The concentration of fire was so intense and rounds so powerful that any hit was likely fatal to the aircraft." The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of how the balance had shifted. German forces launching their last major offensive initially achieved tactical surprise and local superiority. But as American forces recovered from initial shock and began organizing their defense, the sustainability advantages of their weapon systems became apparent. Sergeant First Class Thomas Rodriguez, manning a Quad 50 position near Bastogne, described the pivotal moment when German advances ground to a halt. "They came at us with everything they had, those buzz saws chattering like angry hornets. But we had been preparing for this. When they got within range, we opened up with everything we had. The quad 50s, the single 50s on tanks, even aircraft guns when P-47s could get through the weather. After about an hour of that kind of fire, they stopped coming. Rodriguez was describing the culmination of 3 years of weapons development and tactical evolution. Americans had not simply matched German firepower. They had exceeded it in areas that mattered most for sustained combat operations. The human cost of this technological shift was profound for German forces. Veterans of the Wehrmacht who survived the war consistently reported that American .50 caliber fire had psychological impact that even exceeded the feared MG-42. Where their own weapons created brief but intense periods of devastating fire, American heavy machine guns seemed to offer no respite. The continuous pounding impact of .50 caliber rounds could break down the strongest defensive positions. It could shatter the morale of even veteran troops. Private Johann Weber, captured during the war's final weeks, told interrogators about the effect of sustained .50 caliber fire on German defensive positions. Our machine guns could stop attacks, yes, but only for a time. When the Americans brought up their heavy weapons, it was different. They could fire all day, it seemed, and there was no protection. The sound alone would make men crack after hours of bombardment. Unlike our guns, they never seemed to run out of ammunition. The irony was not lost on military observers. Germany had entered the war with what many considered the finest automatic weapons in the world. The MG-34 and later MG-42 had given German infantry significant advantages in the early years, but by focusing on rate of fire above all other considerations, German designers had created weapons that were psychologically intimidating, but ultimately limited in tactical applications. American weapons designers, working with different priorities and backed by enormous productive capacity, had created a family of weapons that excelled in sustained combat. The grinding warfare that ultimately determined battles' outcomes. The M2 Browning might not have sounded as terrifying as Hitler's buzzsaw, but when Allied forces needed to deliver sustained, accurate, devastating fire, Ma Deuce and her quad-mounted sister proved themselves superior to anything Germans could field. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, statistical comparison told a story beyond simple technical specifications. The MG-42, despite its fearsome reputation, had been produced in quantities of approximately 400,000 units. The M2 Browning family reached production figures exceeding 3 million weapons by war's end. More significantly, American .50 caliber weapons remained in service across dozens of countries for decades after the war ended. The basic M2 design, with only minor modifications, continued serving as the primary heavy machine gun for NATO forces. It remained in production well into the 21st century. The MG-42, despite technical innovations, was largely abandoned by post-war German forces. The legacy of this weapons competition extended far beyond immediate tactical advantages. The American approach to automatic weapons design became the template for post-war machine gun development worldwide. The MG-42's influence was ultimately overshadowed by more fundamental advantages demonstrated by American weapons. As the last shots of World War II echoed across Europe, it was clear Americans had not simply outgunned their German opponents. They had outthought them, creating weapon systems better suited to modern industrial warfare realities. The meat chopper and its single-mounted siblings had proven that the most fearsome weapon wasn't necessarily the one that sounded most terrifying, but the one that kept firing when everything else had fallen silent. The buzzsaw had been silenced, not by a louder sound, but by a more enduring one.